I'm one of those people. I bought the first ever issue of Empire.
I wasn't in that.
No, I was going to say you.
Yeah, I started writing for Empire with issue 3.
I knew you said it wasn't the first one. I think you say it in the book. I
Oh,
wanted to find out which one it was.
yeah. Yeah, for years I thought it was issue 2, and somebody bought me a copy of issue 2 as like a present, and then I couldn't find myself in there. And I thought, oh shit, I've been saying all these years it was issue 2, but I must have missed issue 2 and started with issue 3 instead. But anyway, so I was already reviewing by the time Hudson Hawk came out. Oh, see how I segued to the book.
That was very artful. Well done, you. It's like you've done this before.
Oh, maybe I have, maybe I haven't.
I'm your host, Sergio Angelini, and welcome to Tipping My Fedora, where we discuss movies, books, TV, radio, and much more besides, all from the darker side of the street.
My special guest today is David Hughes, journalist, author, and owner of a terrific boutique Blu-ray label. And although he's a very busy guy, I had to talk to him because he's just published a book called The Unmaking of Hudson Hawk. I love the 1991 movie Hudson Hawk. I know he does too, and I just had to find out what the hell happened behind the scenes. Welcome to the podcast. The first impossible to answer question, which is my icebreaker. Before we talk about you, before we talk about important films from 1991, I want to know, what is your definition of film noir?
Oh gosh. Oh, the definition of film noir.
Afraid so.
Well, I mean, it's like pornography. You know it when you see it, I think. It's going to be black and white. It's going to have a lot of shadows. I'm thinking Jean-Pierre Melville. I'm thinking Key Largo. I'm not great on decades and definitions and stuff like that. But I guess that sometime around the 1930s, American filmmakers, often not native Americans, started to do very interesting things with like black and white photography. So I couldn't look at a list of films and say, yeah, that's a film noir, or that's not a film noir. But, I guess the first ones that come to mind would be things like Key Largo, The Killing, Staircase to the Gallows, is it?
Elevator to the Gallows. If we're not going to try it in French, yeah.
AKA Out of the Past, I think. Yeah. It's easier to identify like what's a pre-code film.
Yeah, because you got a date for it, and absolutely, and there's no. I mean, this is why it's a deliberately annoying question, because one enjoys the answer because you're never going to get a genuine answer. It's the response, I should have said, rather than an answer, right. Because you're saying, well. It's not my answer. It's not really a genre. Is it a movement? Well, okay, if you want to do, dates and things, but it's too soft, it's too permeable. If we accept that film noir is this amorphous thing, but it's a thing, we kind of know it, like I say, we know it when you see it, even if you can't define it. Do you have a film that you think in your mind when you were first getting into film that you sort of said, oh, okay, this is what people were talking about when they say film noir?
I guess it would have to be something like Sunset Boulevard, probably.
Yeah.
Where I don't know. I mean, something where crime is not going to pay, and that's the Hays Code at work, probably. I mean, the classic image for me would be a suitcase full of money opening and all of the bills flying around the airport. That's got to be something that says to me, like, oh my God, it's all gone horribly wrong. Everybody's double crossing each other. Lots of shadows. There possibly will be one shot where the bars of a child's cot will be superimposed over the faces of the people who are definitely going to jail at the end of this movie or whatever. There'll be some betrayal. There may be a femme fatale. I mean, it's such an incredible. I don't know if it's a genre, but it's such a, let's call it a genre for now. It's such an incredible genre or subgenre of like crime films. And I mean, I'm no film noir nerd, but when I was in Paris a couple of weeks ago, I did suddenly find myself in the Pigalle area, and I suddenly was in the world of Bob Le Flambeur.
Right.
And back to that incredible period of, Jean-Pierre Melville's 7 films, 6 masterpieces, oh, it's just, it's amazing. It's still, that place is still kind of evokes those kind of memories for me. I can almost see it in black and white,
Yeah.
And I try to do this kind of pathetic comparing the original, and then of course you just Google it and somebody's spent an entire weekend doing just that and finding the exact scene in the film. So the internet is wonderful sometimes.
Yeah, and in fact, Bob LaFlambeur, of course, makes a guest appearance in your book, which we're here to talk about, which is The Unmaking of Hudson Hawk. But
an even better segue than my earlier one.
Well, before we even get to that, having been a proper reader of Empire from the very earliest days, more recently, and I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit more about it. So obviously, you've written several books, your ongoing journalism work. More recently, I just became aware of, is it Plumeria? Because I'm from Italy. So in Italy, we would say Plumeria. But I got your release of Bull Durham. Fabulous, and had the same materials that were used in the Criterion set. Well, the HD transfer is the same, which is interesting. One of the first things I read about you when I bought that was I think I'd come across, and it was probably when I was still on Twitter maybe, that I read this piece that you've written about setting up your own boutique label.
Ah, yeah.
And I'll put a link to it in the show notes for this, because I think it's a terrific article. I really do. I thought, this is so illuminating. This is so interesting. So I just wanted to hear your side of it, really, because also you've released things like Sneakers, which obviously sold out far too quickly. Such a great film. So I didn't get my hands on one. I've got a German Blu-ray of it instead. That's what I had to go all the way to Germany because I couldn't get yours. But could you tell us a little bit about your boutique label? And because obviously you've gone into publishing not just Blu-rays, you're publishing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, well, it's kind of crazy, but basically I had this idea in 2017 to do an audio commentary podcast, which I knew I wanted to call Rogue Commentary. And I don't know how many episodes we have now, probably about 50. But then when lockdown came along, I thought, oh, this is an ideal time to actually do this thing. And I realized that I'd sort of, as much as you can register like a Twitter handle, I'd registered optimistically in 2017. That's how I know when it was, the Twitter handle Rogue Commentary, and then I thought, I better actually do this. And I thought, who am I going to get? Oh, I'll just ask people I know. So I knew this guy called Richard Holmes, who was the producer of a film called Soft Top, Hard Shoulder, with Peter Capaldi, written by Peter Capaldi, directed by Stefan Schwartz. And so I said to Richard, who I knew because he was producing a film that I'd written, and I said to him, would you mind doing an audio commentary for this film? And he said, oh yeah, I can get the director. And then one day in my inbox was this audio commentary that they'd recorded together. Now they didn't have a good copy of the movie that they could watch along
right.
together. So they actually watched along with a bad Blu-ray rip of a VHS or something crazy like that. And I said, oh gosh, it's such a shame that nobody will really be able to watch this because it's really hard to find on like DVD and what have you. And then he said, yeah, I've got this like really nice HD copy of the movie. And I was like, I'm getting an idea. So literally, this is how Plumeria was born. I basically started the label so that I could release Soft Top, Hard Shoulder on Blu-ray, so people could listen along to the commentary. And of course, I put the commentary on the disc, which was a nice shout out. So there's some lovely cross-pollination in there, And then I did a few more episodes of the podcast, and then I just thought, okay, what should I release next? And I just started sort of looking around for what titles were available and thinking, oh, what could we do? I did a collaboration with Film Stories magazine, Simon Brew, as you may know. So we did Sneakers, Bull Durham, and No Way Out, as a collaboration between the two of us. And that was really cool because it helped to share the risk and made it so that because you have to pony up quite a lot of money, as you know from that article, for the rights. Soft Top, Hard Shoulder was easier because it was just a one-page deal memo, literally. That I think the first time I'd been out in months into London during lockdown was to drive over to Richard Holmes's house and sit in the garden because we weren't allowed to mix indoors, and sign the paper outside there and then drive home again. It was amazing. Yeah, so it's kind of a nice little dual lockdown project. And then I forget how we got into. So we did a few more titles, and then we released our first new film, which was Horde. So it was a title that we picked up. We did The Big Man as well, which I was really happy to do because we kind of did a really nice HD up-res of that And it lost about as much money as the original of The Big Man did, which is a bit of a shame because we got a lovely new commentary from Stephen Woolley, the producer. I got a commentary from the director, David Leland, just before 6 months before he died. And I didn't even know he was sick at the time. But so that was kind of a cool thing. And he gifted me this big framed quad poster. And I didn't know it was like a going out of business sale kind of thing. And then somehow we got into doing publishing. And it was the first title we did was a 50th anniversary republication of an out-of-print book called The Cooler, which was written by the co-creator of The Prisoner, George Markstein. And I thought, if we bring that back into print, we'll get all the Prisoner fans. And then the second book we did was another 50th anniversary bringing back into print, which was the novel that Alan Sharp, the screenwriter of the great neo-noir movie Night Moves, wrote as a rebuttal to the film almost. You know, it's like, what? The film is amazing and perfect.
Exactly.
So he wrote a less good version of it into an but the book is a really great read, and it's a curiosity. And then we had the wonderful Tony Stella do the artwork for the front cover, the late
great,
Tony Stella. So it does feel like everybody that has anything to do with any of the things that I work on sort of sadly dies shortly after they work with us.
I'll keep an eye on that. Yeah,
so watch out. Anyway, so we did that. Then we published our first novel, which was by a film critic called John Bleasdale. And then eventually I just thought, I'm just going to do this Hudson Hawk book thing myself.
Bruce Willis, Danny Aiello, Andy McDowell, Hudson Hawk. Life doesn't get much better than this.
And I don't know. I mean, it's just I get the weirdest itches that I need to scratch. And somehow it became a book. And then I think it's so weird that when I got that first interview for Hudson Hawk, which was the guy who co-created the story with Bruce Willis, Robert Kraft, who gets a story by credit, you know, also did some of the music for the film. I did that interview with him, and basically I did the interview on a Friday, and he said, "You won't believe this, but I've just got back from visiting Bruce, who he'd been friends with for 40 years in his home, you know, in Turks and Caicos." He said, we watched the second half of Dr. No and the first half of Hudson Hawk together. And because he said, you know, Bruce is kind of sadly like in and out because of his aphasia, you know, but they both kind of watched it for the first time in what was then like 33 years, I think. And I just thought, oh my God, you know, this has got to be, I've got to do something more with this. And I think it's wild because I just realized that 30 years ago, this October, I broke the story of the making of The Island of Dr. Moreau in The Guardian. It was the front page of like The Guardian's first G2 section, you know, the sort of tabloid section of their
I used to get that every week. Yeah.
Right there. Me too. It's the only day of The Guardian I bought, you know. But, and that was 30 years ago. And I thought, well, that's never been a book, but so it says something, I think, about the craziness of Hudson Hawk, that this is a book. You know? So I don't know if it's even a book, but it's 200 pages and it's got a spine. So, you know, technically it's a very long article, really. But I kind of did the diligence, I think, of getting as many interviews as I could get. And I'm still kind of trying to get a few that I missed the first time because of refusals or whatever, but maybe now it's out in the world. There's an option to do a second edition that's got more material. If I can get Joel Silver, amazing. If I can get Sandra Bernhard this time, that would be amazing. And I'm kind of pretty much happy with everyone else I got. And I'm working with Michael Lemon, the director, on a couple of other projects at the moment, which is quite fun. So unfortunately, he was deep in the massive telly project at the time, but I got so much stuff from previous interviews of his that you don't really miss him in the book, I don't think. I haven't actually got his feedback on the book yet, and I'm waiting for also Joel Silver's. But I've got a few other bits of feedback from, you know, Stephen D'Souza and Daniel Waters, the other screenwriters, who both kind of said, "Oh, this is my trauma repackaged," you know, as a book. But you know, they're probably living in the house that it paid for, so not together, obviously. They have to.
No, you know, that would be so cool. That really would be.
Buongiorno.
Yeah, buongiorno. Maybe you could help me. I'm being blackmailed into robbing the Vatican by a psychotic American corporation and the CIA.
I don't,
You don't speak English?
But no, I mean, D'Souza, one of the things I was interested to read in the book, there's lots of fascinating things in your book, but Stephen E. D'Souza is someone who I knew from doing television, and then all of a sudden he was doing these big films, and he was sort of associated with, because I think his first big movie credit is probably 48 Hours, but he's one of a gigantic number of people who worked on that. Including Roger Spotswood, people like that, and then all of a sudden he's gone from someone who's doing Automan or The $6 Million Man or things like that, which I used to watch as a kid, so I knew the name, because you've got to admit, as names go, it tends to stick out a bit. And then all of a sudden he's the guy doing Commando and Die Hard, and the second one as well. And it's interesting because I think with Die Hard it was almost like, was it the opposite situation that he was on here, which is I think he was the writer who came in after on Die Hard, but seems to have had a really very good relationship with, is it Jeb Stewart, who I think wrote the first draft, and I think, or whatever they were sort of going with, and they seem to have gotten along really quite well in a strange way. They were very sympathetic to what, not just as writers in the trenches, but I think of just trying to, this, I can see this is what you're going for, and now the producer or director or whatever is asking me to sort of pump up certain things, change certain other things, but there was no attempt to sort of say, oh, that's crap, I can make it better. And here instead, it's kind of like D'Souza, he's done 3 drafts, and then he's going to get a boatload of money to go and do this other film, so he's going to go do that instead. Bye. But he's the one who rang up Daniel Waters, or because obviously Lemon knows him very well, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Stephen is he told me once that he was a WGA arbiter. So basically, he would be one of those guys who the WGA would send a bunch of drafts and say, right, who do you think deserves the credit on this one, right? Because I think some WGA members get that kind of privilege, a bit of a poison chalice, but it's an interesting thing to do. And Stephen said, whenever he did a rewrite, he would always fix the things that were broke and not worry too much about whether the amount that he rewrote would get him a screenplay credit. He would always put the film first. Now, obviously, a lot of people could say that, but through being an arbiter, he said that I could see that sometimes they would just change the name of characters, because when you did almost like a skim read to see who'd had the most profound effect on the screenplay, and I'm really fascinated. I mean, this from my books, The Greatest Sci-Fi Movies Never Made and Tales from Development Hell. That I really like the granular, like not just who did what, but like how did this evolve into that, and going through the various screenplays of like Alien 3 and seeing some of the DNA of like Vincent Ward's draft and all of that stuff end up in the final. I mean, absolutely fascinating. And the weird thing is that from my own multiple draft screenplays, the one thing I can never bear to do is if I'm working on a new draft where somebody new comes in and says, hey, we like this draft, can we like progress this one? What I can never bear to do is go back and find the bits that I really loved that the other could cut out, and because it's just too painful to go and reread those old screenplays and see all the darlings you had to kill along the way, but so I really respect Stephen for that and a million other things as well. But when I do screenplay rewrites of other people's screenplays, I've always tried to keep that advice in mind, which is to just change the stuff that needs changing and don't have a bigger influence on anything that's already working, just so that you can have more of an influence. But I can understand that some screenwriters depend on that for their credits and therefore their income, because incomes are credit dependent. I mean, all the screenplays contracts that I've signed over the years, they all say if you end up with sole screenwriting credit, you literally get like $100,000 bonus or something. I mean, it's insane. You get rewarded for being the only name on a film, not just because they don't have to pay anybody else, but just because it's one of those things that the WGA kind of writes into their contracts, which is amazing.
All I wanted was a cappuccino.
You still think you're the greatest cat burglar that ever lived?
You are one hell of a thief.
Hudson Hawk is an evil, evil man.
The Big E.
I'm just some guy that's good at swiping stuff.
So I guess what I should ask you right away was, so it wasn't because it was the 35th anniversary or something like that. No. Just say come out of the blue. So why?
I mean, it wasn't. When I started working on it, it was 2023 or 2024, I think. So it took a while to get to get it actually down. And in fact, the last thing that delayed it into the 35th anniversary, not that the 35th anniversary is much to, it's not one of those big anniversaries. When you turn 35, you get extra bunting or whatever. Hudson Hawk has been having a moment for about the past 20 years, as I detail in the book. That the first rumblings of a reappraisal, I was astonished to learn, came about 10 years after it was released. It's amazing. In fact, the thing that held it up the longest wasn't me finishing the damn thing. It was Walter Chow not being able to get the rights for his own introduction to the book, which was an article that he published on a website. And we just couldn't get the guy who had the rights to. And then eventually, about 2 months ago, I think, Walter finally came back to me and said, I've got it, publish and be damned, and I literally sent it off to the typesetter like the next day. I was so excited to get it out there, so great. And then it just happened to hit and I thought, I should release it actually on the 35th anniversary, but then it turned out to be a Sunday, and I thought, oh no, that's just so that's why it came out on May the 7th. And then the first print run sold out before May the 7th. So I ended up having to do a second and then a third print run. So it's like we've made a bestseller by mistake, and it's kind of paid for all the losses frankly, on all the other projects except Sneakers, which is the only other one that sort of came close to breaking even. But,
Well, no, congrats. I mean, so, okay, you do explain it in the book, but for those who haven't read it yet, why is it the unmaking of Hudson Hawk?
Well, that's a very good question. No one else has asked that, surprisingly. I mean, I no shade to the film, which I love, but it did seem to me to be one of those where let's say you've got problems with the Running Man remake, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And you've got problems with Die Hard 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said, I wonder why they didn't just get Steven to write Die Hard 4 and 5, right? And it's kind of like, okay, so Steven's version of Hudson Hawk, to me, if you had filmed it, would have been a really good film. To me, there's no doubt about it. It would have been very different to the film that we've all grown to love in our mad sort of way. And it wouldn't be as unique, and it wouldn't have needed the reassessment or whatever. It would have sort of come out and been its thing. And I think I would have liked it very, very much. Okay. But of course, I don't know whether this is part of like the British psyche that you sort of root for the underdog or what have you. But certainly the more the critics savaged it, the more I doubled down on my own enthusiasm for the film right from the get-go, So it really kind of began, well, not exactly began, because Jeff Reno and Ron Osborne did that Cold War draft, as the Moonlighting guys, which wasn't really anything like the Hudson Hawk that we know. But so Steven's draft, I thought, yeah, if you'd filmed that would have been fine. And then it seemed to be dismantled piece by piece, perhaps initially by hiring not quite the right director for that material. So if you're going to bring in Michael Lemon, you may as well, you ought to really bring in a director who's a screenwriter who's more in tune with his sensibilities, which of course they did. And Bruce and Joel were both big fans of Heathers, and you could tell because Joel went on, he'd produced The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, etc. So now you've got a bunch of people in a room who, if you had a conclave of cardinals, it would be like you've got all the cardinals who could potentially be the Pope, and one of them is going to be the Pope when the white smoke goes out. But you've got like Ozzy Osbourne and Margaret Thatcher in the room somehow, and you're like, well, but let's do it anyway. We're gonna we'll get all these people together. You know what I mean? It's like so weird. But of course, it's the clash of those forces that makes the film such a kind of interesting film to revisit. Because every time I watch it, I still think, I can't believe this is happening. When they're doing like the Three Stooges routine, I'm like, oh my God, I forgot that was in there. And I'm just obviously, when you've got the fiery, and the fact that it's got kind of R-rated gore and R-rated, humor in it and stuff is so out of kilter with the sensibility of the designed for 12-year-olds kind of attitude of much of the rest of the film. So tonally, I don't have to say it's all over the shop. It's one of the most tonally all over the shop movies. Because you could look at some other films like Barry Levinson's Toys and say, oof, you know, whether you love it or loathe it, you can at least say, well, yes, it's got a certain tone to it that kind of is its thing. And yeah, not for me. But at least it had a point of view, whereas this has got every point of view, you know? So...
No, I like that. I think that's a good way of putting it.
Does it help to know that James Coburn was in the Flint movies? You know, maybe, but who the fuck is going to know that in 1991 as a 20-year-old cinema goer?
You and me knew, you know, you and I did, but yes, but they're just the two of us.
There's only one man to cope with it. Find Derek Flint.
Yes, James Coburn is back as Derek Flint, the master of the kiss, the karate, and the kill. And you're back in action with him.
I mean, like you, I mean, I don't know if it was it at the Odeon West End? I can't remember. I know Die Hard 2 was, and Die Hard 1 was, so I don't know if that's where they put it. But a different studio, of course, so probably not. But I mean, I remember seeing it, really liked it. You know, I just laughed a lot. I thought it was great. Somehow, the fact that it was going to be funny was probably okay with me, because I think you make a really good case for the fact that a lot of the issues around the film in terms of just it not doing at all well in America, in the director's commentary for the DVD, you know, there's all that joke. Have I mentioned it did really well in Europe? You know, I mean, I think he says that about 4 times, and you know, and I think, which it did by comparison, it still, you know, lost a fair amount of money up front. I'm sure it did fine eventually, but it's one of those films you're thinking, well, it's a very eccentric movie, and in terms of it being profitable, you haven't made a proper calculation. You're thinking, no, you've misjudged that. You should be making it for $20 million, and then you might make a reasonable return on it. Because I tell you what, the film that springs to my mind, which I know is going to sound very stupid, is Toby Hooper's Life Force, where you sort of watch that. You get what they're going for. You can see that they're going for a kind of Quatermass type thing. And yet it seems that they are colossally misjudging the audience in terms of who is going to come and see it. It's too dumb for adults, but it's too full of nudity and gore and unpleasantness for younger viewers. So you've just completely, you know, edged out people who are really going to want to come and seriously enjoy it. And here you've got, I mean, the language thing in particular, I do find sort of really interesting. This idea that it's got all that swearing, which you could easily do without, in the sense of you're saying, no, this is going to be a fairy tale for adults. I mean, it seems to me that that's what the opening Rocky and Bullwinkle bit is sort of about, in a way. It's saying, look, this is going to be ironic. It's not going to be straightforward. It's going to be a bit cartoony and zany, and it's going to be a wild journey. So don't be, be surprised, but don't feel you're not going to be watching something conventional. Because like you say, I think if they'd done the D'Souza draft and they had gotten Mark Lester or Rennie Harlin to direct it, it would have been one of those films, and it would have been absolutely fine. Whereas, you're sort of thinking, but that's not what you've done. And yet somehow you're not quite letting go of some of those elements. And they're sort of getting away with it, but you're pushing away a mass audience, surely. Certainly an American mass audience. I think what's interesting is how that wasn't obvious.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I enjoyed about your book in particular, was the way that the sense that you're all kind of caught up in the machine somehow. They're trying to make their own gold. They've got their own machine, and it's also malfunctioning, and its own bits are missing, and they're having a hard time finding them to put them all together in the right order. As an Italian, someone who's lived here a long time, I enjoyed all the Italian locations and things. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to go round and round Piazza Navona because you could rent a bicycle for, 50 lira, I think, and you basically get 30 minutes. So Mum would sit and have a coffee, and me and my brother would just go round and round in circles at Piazza Navona, things like that. So it was lovely to see it on screen. It's then disappointing to hear everybody who worked on it from the American standpoint saying it was a nightmare to shoot in Italy. I mean, somehow they were stunned that it was unbelievably hot in August. I was thinking, if it's less than 40, it's really strange in Italy in August. You know, there's a reason they all go on holiday in August, you know. And in 1990, they wouldn't have had the aircon either. So, sorry, but you should have done a bit of research. You know, that's daft. On the other hand, that because they clearly didn't have enough local production personnel to tell them who to do all the payoffs to, because let's face it, they're shooting in New York. It's not that you don't have to do that. You just know who you have to make the payment.
Right.
Let's be honest, you know. So I think that's very funny. And I just thought, oh dear, you know.
I think maybe they did actually. They just weren't high enough up the food chain. You know,
right.
But Sabrina Canale, who was married to David Leland, she was the production secretary.
Oh, right.
And see, it all connects. You know, the big man.
It all comes back to that.
Weird, yeah, very strange. Yeah, so she was on the film as production secretary, so got lots of kind of behind the scenes stories from that source, but she wasn't high enough up the food chain to actually be able to kind of influence the production. I think they kind of needed to have like an Italian line producer, whereas they had like an Italian production designer and they had an Italian director of photography. And, you know, so it was a bit of a kind of, it had some Euro cred, but I mean, it was just depressing listening to the audio commentary with Michael Lemon, where he said that scene where they had to find the apartment that looked out onto the Colosseum. And that was one of the most difficult. He said, now we just do it as a process shot. And it's like, well, you could have just done it as like a backdrop like they did in the films, but just a little bit higher definition back projection. You know, there's a reason why, you know, those Bond films where they could afford to, but a lot of films couldn't afford to go to or didn't, you know, was just.
Well, this is the weird part. This is way more expensive than the Bonds were even then.
Yeah. So they were like hemorrhaging money, obviously, for those reasons. And then obviously Hungary had its own when they shifted production to Hungary.
That is bizarre, though, isn't it? I mean, literally, you make such a gigantic change to the script, but you still have to go to Hungary. And there's a movie in that, surely. There's a movie about, you know, the kind of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern approach. You know, what were they all doing in Hungary every day? You know, and certainly that depiction that you make of just how tough it was there at that time. Just how difficult, you know, and that. I mean, I almost wish it weren't true. That's true when they all get sort of stranded in this restaurant on their first night because the taxis have all gone on strike. And the entire, you know, I don't know how many people it was in that group, but it's kind of, you know, half of the supporting cast has to traipse for hours before they can even start their first day of shooting.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Like every interview I did, there would be a new kind of story. That one was from Lorraine Toussaint,
who's great. I mean, she's terrific.
Yeah, no, she's terrific. And she, so, you know, she kind of told me that one. And there were a lot more stories that kind of didn't find their way into the book just because the book had a certain flow. So I wanted to kind of put as much as I could from those. Like, I don't know if I spent enough time on like music and editing and the post-production and stuff like that. But I just thought, well, not everyone's interested in the granular. Maybe it's just me. I'm just more interested in the nuts and bolts of the script and then moving to the kind of production. So I may have skimped.
Started the week by stealing the sports stuff and ended it by swiping the codex. Yeah, but what are your plans for the weekend? Hosting away the Coliseum?
Can't we just go back to the kissing part?
But what you were saying earlier touched sort of lit a touch paper in my brain, which is I've never seen the airline cut or the TV cut of Hudson Hawk. But given what you said about the gore and the swearing, I think it would be very interesting to dig that out. And I'm actually surprised that those aren't more readily available, those edits, because if I was releasing Hudson Hawk on Blu-ray, I think it would be quite something to buy the rights to the airline cut, which they surely have in the archives somewhere, because they would have kept I assume they would have kept like a master of that version of it for if it was playing on TV in Peoria or whatever.
Yeah,
you know?
They would have been desperate to have a version they could show any time of day because at a certain point it must have been necessary to maximize.
Because you don't really want to watch the airline cut of Die Hard except for a few yucks. But when this one is basically a live action sort of Looney Tunes cartoon in some ways, you do kind of want to see, what would it look like with all the swears and the gore taken out? And, I mean, maybe it would be only 100 minutes.
No, but you're right, though, because it would be far more interesting, partly if it's one of those ones where they just have to come up with similar sounding words that aren't sort of naughty.
Yeah, no, that's always,
and then do they just edit them out, or do they use alternate takes, of course, which you sort of wonder. There must have been a lot of material, because it's one of the odd things about the film is it's 100 minutes. I think it's what makes it good. And it sort of also makes it feel more like a comedy, less like an action film, even from that era.
I mean, to be fair, it feels like 2 hours and 10 minutes to me, not,
But you're right, because it's not like, say, the Blu-ray release of De Palma's Dress to Kill, which includes the alternate version that was created for broadcast TV. And
interesting.
It's very interesting to watch, but actually, to me, I'm not a hardened journo like you are, but I started to feel slightly... Well, because you're watching all the naughty bits, because then he compares them, right? And it's kind of like... So I'm only seeing all those bits. It's like you're forgetting all the artistic stuff, all the funny stuff, all the great performances. No, it's the groin shot. It's the extra boob shot. It's the
right.
You know what? I'm worried what my neighbours are going to think looking through my window, man. But on the other hand, it is fascinating. I mean, particularly the Scarface one. I think Laurent Bozzereau did it for both, but on Scarface, obviously, where there's so much swearing, and it's very interesting how creative they had to get to come up with words that could sort of fit the mouth movements. And would they have done that at the time? That would be so interesting to find out if Lemon was involved with that.
They were definitely doing it at that time, and they would mostly get the original talent to do it as well. They weren't like dropping in some Johnny-come-lately actor to be. Bruce Willis would have half a day where he would have to record all the alternative
It'd be in the contract, wouldn't it, really? Because
exactly. And it would be a bothersome, obviously, and it would have to come in. But I mean, because that would be annoying because you're sort of done with the film at that point. But it would be part of the ADR process would be to come in and do the airline version. So, they all the broadcast television version, certainly back then. So they would have had to do that. But I'd be curious to see that.
We're hanging off a castle in the middle of Italy, and you're asking me how you look?
Okay. You don't gotta get tacky about it.
You look gorgeous. You look like Zorro.
Well, I didn't know.
I didn't know that Horst Vacano was the original DP. Again, if they had thought some of this through properly, the idea of having an Italian DP for a primarily European shoot might have been the obvious thing to do. It didn't have to be that one. There's lots of other ones. I mean, maybe Storaro wouldn't have showed up for it. I don't know. But he might have done. And, let's face it, if he can do Ishtar, he could do this. One kind. I mean, this is the obvious comparison, of course, in terms of trying to come up with a kind of modern day road movie, in that sense. And yet they didn't. They get the guy who's done fantastic work with Paul Verhoeven, which is interesting because that's one of the strong elements of Verhoeven, although it comes out in extreme violence, if you like. But there's a guy with a strong black sense of humor, so that even Total Recall, let alone RoboCop, which he shot both of those just before this, and they'd absolutely have that great sense of humor. It's even more dangerous a sense of humor in Starship Troopers or something. So in a way, it's sort of interesting to have that guy there with a kind of, shall we say, the European sensibility. And yet somehow this idea that they weren't going to have an Italian production manager, or basically what normally you would do, I mean, hire an Italian company to handle that side of it, so you're not constantly having to translate things. And that's interesting. And I love that bit when they talk about, they're about to shoot Godfather 3 here and in the same location to sort of pass for the Vatican, things like that, which is just brilliantly funny. I love this idea that they just cross each other. I think there's this story, I think Frank Darabont's audio commentary for Shawshank Redemption talks about how they were doing a recce on a prison they were going to use, and they walked past John Frankenheimer, who was doing a recce for a prison for a film that he was doing at the same. Well, presumably it would have been Against the Wall, the Carl McCacklin film about Adler.
Yeah.
And I just loved the idea that he just crossed and went, "Oh, hello," it's sort of Checkpoint Charlie,
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of people have approached me and said, would I do an Ishtar book? And it would be kind of nice to tie all that together, but I've never actually seen Ishtar. I have to say. No, I'm waiting for the perfect moment.
I will tell you my Ishtar story just because you need to know this. Okay. But was it 1986, 87, I guess it came out. I was living in Singapore at the time, and me and my girlfriend it was a Saturday, and we were wandering around in Singapore. And I don't know if you've been to Singapore, but it's an island state. It's small. It's actually gotten bigger. They've reclaimed a lot of land since then. But in essence, there's only so many places you can go. There's not a lot to do. We went and got a bite to eat, and we were just, sort of hanging out in a mall somewhere. And then we looked at our watches, and we sort of said, we've been doing this for 4.5 hours. We thought, what the, all we did was go to McDonald's or something. And, what the hell? And we really puzzled. We went and sat down, and it took us 2 minutes to remember that we had gone to see Ishtar first.
Oh, my God.
And we just couldn't remember it. We really couldn't. Wow. It made no impression on us whatsoever. I know some people who totally love it. I know people at Indicator who love it. They were planning to put the Blu-ray out. And, of course, in the end, it got cancelled for reasons relating to the extras and things, which is just a shame because I certainly would have been so interested to see what they would have added to it. And God knows, it's a film I'd like to feel that I'd somehow got it wrong in my life. I'd have no interest in going back to it, but that was just the oddest thing. It was just such a weird experience. Wow. And it's kind of, you know what? It's kind of, because again, in the road movies, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, they sang and danced really well, and they had good songs. The joke here is that they're singing terrible songs, and they're really, really bad. I think weirdly, I can see why this might not work commercially.
But then, and I find it so hard to bet against Elaine May. But the very first story I heard about Ishtar was that somebody said that Elaine May had declined to call cut, even though the actors had left the shot. And when whoever it was, the first AD or, maybe said, do you want to call cut? The actors have gone. And she said they might come back. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it's such an amazing story to hear. The first thing you ever heard about that film was, and you see, everybody may have their Ishtar story. So maybe I should do, I don't know. I'm not in the market to do another one just yet. I feel like I ought to get a new, revised, updated, and uncancelled version of like Tales from Development Hell out into print because it's so like horrifically out of date. But it would be nice to get that out there at some point. So maybe I'll do that. I did sort of start work on a new edition of that, but then you just realize, does anybody want to read a chapter about Neil Gaiman? And there are various other factors why you might necessarily want to put that in. So it's a tricky one. Or maybe I'll just put the two books together, cut out the chapters I don't want anymore, because there's still really good, there are really good things in there that are about films that never actually got made. And I think I got a little bit too interested in the unmaking of films like Alien 3 that did get made, but had a very strange journey to the screen. Whereas I'm still fascinated, obviously, by the great Smoke and Mirrors movie with like Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones and Sean Connery, and Crusade, of course, the ultimate that got away.
Schwarzenegger, Verhoeven,
with AI, I'm sure of it. They'll get hold of that Waylon Green script or whatever. Yeah, so I don't really. I mean, he didn't ask me what I was doing next, but I've got a hard out, so I'm just kind of getting to the sort of. So, is there anything else you want to ask me before I have to go and do half-termy type things?
Well, I was going to ask, what's your opinion of the William Conrad voiceover? Because I really like it.
The time was 1481. The artist was Leonardo da Vinci. The guy on the donkey is just a guy on a donkey. Anyway, they called this statue the Sforza, and it was going to be the...
Yeah, I'm not a fan, to be honest.
I had an inkling from your book.
It's so crazy. Yeah. I mean, I just think there are certain things in the film that is like, they are callbacks to things that nobody of the age that was in that the film was intended for would get. And I don't mean to knock people who were in their 20s, like peak sort of Bruce Willis fans that were minted by Die Hard, if not by Moonlighting, which skewed slightly older, but Die Hard 2, then Hudson Hawk. The audience is not really thinking about the Three Stooges, Looney Tunes, the road movies, George Kaplan as a reference to
North by Northwest.
Yeah. They're not sort of getting that stuff. They're not thinking, oh, I see what they're doing here. They're doing like a deconstruction of the action movie while doing a Bing Crosby and Bob Hope kind of. No, that's no one understands that. You have to know like too much before you can sort of fully appreciate what you're doing. So if you don't know what is being deconstructed, whereas when Ford Fairlane gives his number to a girl and she says, well, hang on a second, 555, that's not a real number, that's only in the movies. And he says, what do you think this is, real life? That's deconstructing a movie. Last Action Hero is a movie that deconstructs movies. The deconstructivist parts that I really admire in Hudson Hawk, the whole thing isn't that. If it was, it would be fascinating. But then if it was, it would be Last Action Hero, which is a perfectly good deconstructivist action movie to me. Just to sort of wrap this up a little bit, the thing that haunts me the most about the failure of Hudson Hawk, critically and commercially, I guess, is what Daniel Waters says, where he said, it's such a shame that it kind of slapped the smile off of Bruce Willis's face, and he never really attempted anything like that again, which is why I kind of hold quite dear the comedy that he does in Friends, for instance, where I think, oh, right, look at what you could have had. Because he's so good, because he's completely confident in the comedy of it, but you never got that look who's talking sort of wisecracky, wise ass sort of thing. Hudson Hawk kind of killed that off a little bit. And
yeah, I mean, whole 9 yards, whole 10 yards, I think they're definitely comedies, but I agree, it's not something he pursued, and he became.
Yeah, he didn't go full.
No. Bruce, I think the fact that he could do something like 12 Monkeys, although I think he made Terry Gilliam's life very difficult. It's great when he's doing films like that to have at least an askew point of view. On the other hand, when he made that film with Kevin Smith, Cop Out, it didn't work. And I think it was an unhappy experience all round. So I think that didn't help either. Now, just to finish up, people who want to get a copy of your terrific book, where can they get a copy? Because they can't get it from Amazon.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's only available at, what did you say again? Plumeria?
Plumeria?
Well, I say Plumeria. No one's actually told me how to pronounce it. I don't know.
It's a flower. What are you going to do?
Flower, just like the flower, yeah. So, Plumeria pics.co.uk. Thanks for that. Link in the show notes. So the 4th printing is underway. So we do have some copies from the 3rd printing left, but they are literally selling as fast as I can print them, which is unexpectedly great. And it also, there's a snowball effect as well, because I see that people who are like Paul Scheer bought one the other day, and I'm thinking, is this going to be like, is there going to be a How Did This Get Made episode? And is something like that in the so I don't know. It could there could be some interesting stuff coming up. And then there was a lot of noise made this weekend. I saw a lot of different 35th anniversary articles, which is very cheering. But what's amazing, I think, overall, is not that the lovers have come out of the Hudson Hawkers have come out of the woodwork and are all sort of collectivizing and storm the studio and demand a sequel, at least in like comic book form or something. But it's the fact that now there is a sort of, unwittingly, I've created this sort of focal point for people to come out and say, yeah, that's probably what happened. I did actually like the film, and I've always liked the film, but it has been the love that doth not dare speak its name. So, and now I feel like you could be out and proud and say, yes, I love Hudson Hawk, and not just feel like you're the lone voice crying in the wilderness.
It's a fantastic movie, and I think you've done it proud, David. So thanks very much for that.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You have been listening to Tipping My Fedora, the show about all things noir. It is produced for Castiglione Publishing by me, Sergio Angelini, and our theme tune is by Petar Milinkovic, whose work is available through Tailkeeper Music. All audio clips are the copyright of their respective owners, and used under fair dealing and fair use exceptions solely for the purposes of criticism and review. Please subscribe to Tipping My Fedora wherever you get your podcast fix, and it would be great if you could leave ratings and reviews about the show at Apple Podcasts. Be seeing you.